morning. Happy Tuesday. Welcome to Connection, coming to you from Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. Let's begin today with our morning blessing. Spirit of Truth, we give thanks today for our connection in this time of togetherness, for our sameness as well as our contrast, and for the light we reflect to one another and see in one another. We give thanks for the holy that holds us and for the humanity that always brings us back to the holy. We ask that our happiness, our peace, and our joy now be woven into the fabric of the world around us, and that it serve as nourishment to feed the heart of the collective. In the name and nature of the Christ, amen, and so it is. All right, we are continuing our series today on the chakras. Our quotes begin with this one. Intuition is seeing with the soul. And that's my title today as well. The author of that quote was Dean Koontz, and my title today is Seeing with Your Soul. Next, from Khalil Gibran, when you reach the end of what you should know, you will be at the beginning of what you should sense. Okay, next, always come from the heart, your true heart, not the head. When in doubt, choose the heart. This does not mean deny your own experiences and that which you have learned empirically through the years. It means to trust yourself to integrate intuition and experience. There is a balance, a harmony. There is to be nurtured between the head and the heart. When the intuition rings clear and true, loving impulses are favored. Brian Weiss. Okay, I want to stop right here and dissect this wonderful quote before we continue, because so much is contained within it. So many of the concepts we've been talking about recently in this series, all packed into one paragraph. Let's start with the first two sentences. Always come from the heart, your true heart, and not the head. When in doubt, choose the heart. Okay, a few years ago, I did an entire teaching on following your heart instead of following your head. If you missed that, it was you can find it on my personal Facebook page or the church's YouTube channel, Spirit and Truth Sanctuary. It was from March 3rd, 2020, and the title was Heart Over Head. And the way I explained it then was by making a comparison to the way some Christians give this entity called the devil the same amount of power in their minds as God has, as if they are as if they are equal in status, which we know both on an intellectual and a spiritual level is not true. But the way we, or they, I don't, the way some Christians speak about the devil, an outside observer, let's say maybe an alien life form from outer space who has come here and knows nothing about Christianity, someone like that could conclude that there are two equal powers, one good called God and the other evil called the devil, and that they are at war with one another over the fate of the world. And if this alien listened to some Christians talk, or if it attended some of their church services, they might very well come away thinking it's a toss-up as to who will eventually win this battle, and that there's a very real possibility God might lose out to the devil. That's how much power the concept of the devil is given through all of the attention and focus that's placed on him by many Christians. Part of the reason this is the case is because our human dualistic consciousness just can't seem to conceive of an all-powerful, all-good entity or deity without the balance of its opposite, which is what we've made the devil, God's opposite. But the problem with that, as I've said many times before, is that God isn't good all the time. God is all the time. So this being we've created in our minds to be his opposite is a figment of our imagination, because God has no opposite, just like love or life has no opposite. Love's opposite is fear, but life has no opposite. We've talked about that before. Their birth and death are events in your eternal life. Same way with God. God just is. He, she, it has no opposite. He, she, it is all of the time, and created everything. Light and darkness, male and female, all of it. So our dualistic consciousness has separated the bad, or what we perceive as the bad part, out of God, and we've named this part of God the devil. But we know that any negative influence or emotion that there is also a part of his creation and is under his control and ultimately serves his purpose. Any force we perceive as evil is nowhere nearly as strong as the power of love and the forces of good and light. So those two entities or forces are not equal in power or in status. So the comparison I made, in that teaching was, just like many people still believe that God and the devil are equally powerful forces that oppose each other on a level playing field, as it were, similarly, many people believe that the head, also known as the mind, and the heart are equally powerful forces, and that's the big choice we all have to make in life. Should we follow our head or should we follow our heart? But as I went through in that teaching, they are not. For so many reasons and in so many ways, the heart is superior to the head, not the least of which is that while the mind is dualistic, the heart is one. It's singular. The heart is all about unity and oneness. So I'm not going to reteach that lesson, but I wanted to refer to it and refresh your memory with that concept, because we're going to be talking today about our intuition, which comes directly from our heart and bypasses the mind. Kind of. It's as this quote addresses. This quote also addresses that as a faulty concept. It doesn't really bypass the mind as much as it includes it and then transcends it. Oh, thank you. Benjamin is bringing me some water because I apparently need it. I appreciate it. So it's not that our intuition bypasses the mind entirely, which is going to be important later on. It includes it, but then it rises above and transcends it. So I want to start today on the solid foundation of why I believe following your heart is more effective than getting lost in the duality of your mind, as well as give you a reason for why I agree with the first two sentences of the quote I just read. Always come from the heart. These are those two sentences. Always come from the heart, your true heart, and not the head. When in doubt, choose the heart. To do that, to lay that foundation, I just want to read again a short excerpt from a piece I read as part of that original teaching called The Heart Math Experience. It says this: the heart's intelligence is not just physical. It encompasses some of the highest quality feelings we have as humans, such as appreciation, love, care, kindness, patience, compassion, nobility, dignity, honor, and courage. The transformational value of these feelings is born from our energetic or spiritual heart, which affects the physical heart and the information it sends to the brain. Now, time out. Did you get the order there? The heart sends the brain information, not the other way around, as we've been led to believe. We'll talk about that more in depth in a moment. This heart, the energetic or spiritual heart, is associated with a deeper source of wisdom, an intuitive knowing that bypasses normal, logical, linear thought patterns. This is often called the voice of the heart and is known to provide us with much better choices and direction throughout life's interactions than the voice of the mind. Our heart's intuition is the voice of our true, authentic self. When we're in connection with that part of ourselves, that's when we're able to move beyond our limitations and accomplish things that can surprise us. Okay, so that's why I believe in choosing, if there has to be a choice made, in following your heart over your head. All right, moving on now to the rest of that quote. All that I just said is stuff I already agreed with and knew. But this next part of the quote gave me some brand new insight, a perspective that I had never thought about before. The next section says, this does not mean, and the this they're talking about is the idea that you should follow your heart more than or instead of always following your head. This does not mean to deny your own experiences and that which you have learned empirically through the years. It means to trust yourself to integrate intuition and experience. Okay, so at this point, when I read that, I was like that little emoji where the top half of the head is gone. It's like mind blown, like poof. So I can't believe that I had never heard anyone explain it like this before. So it's not that you just keep following your heart time after time, excluding your mind entirely and the obvious lessons that you've learned over the course of your life from those times when you followed your heart and it somehow went awry and you got hurt. It's not that you ignore what it refers to here as what you have learned empirically, and that means through experience. It just means that you trust yourself to integrate those experiences and lessons that you've accumulated into your consciousness so that your intuition includes or encompasses them, and as I said before, then transcends or goes beyond them. In other words, just like other parts of you grow and mature, your physical body, your emotional states, your spirituality, so does your intuition. And it had honestly never occurred to me before reading this quote that your intuition is something that can also mature as you grow. So it's not always just dumb, a dumb, innocent, naive thing to follow your heart. No, what your heart tells you, your intuition, is the result of your initial gut instinct, which now includes all the lessons you've learned through your experiences. Each time you learn a lesson, it gets integrated into your intuition and becomes a permanent part of it if you focus your intention on that as a practice in your life, and if you consider if you consciously decide that that's going to be your truth. Now, I'm not sure that is as incredible a revelation to anyone else as it was to me. Maybe you already knew that, but it really did blow my mind to understand that you can get to a place where following your heart doesn't mean going into a situation blindly with no thought or contribution from the mind whatsoever. I no longer see it as this big choice, head or heart, because this concept kind of merges them together, all of it, into your intuition. And we'll talk a little later about how we do this. Okay, the last section of that quote says, there is a balance, a harmony there to be nurtured between the head and the heart. When the intuition rings clear and true, loving impulses are favored, which to me just means, just reemphasizes the concept of always choosing love in any situation over anything else. Whenever there's a choice between love and fear, love or hate, love and jealousy, love and greed, anything you can think of that would be a choice, it's always best and it's always the highest road to choose love. So, like I said, that's an absolutely wonderful quote that contains so many powerful concepts that I believe in. All right, so that was all just a quote. Now on to our last quote. And you guessed it, this right here tells us how we integrate our experiences into our intuition. Meditation is an essential travel partner on your journey of personal transformation. Meditation connects you with your soul, and this connection gives you access to your intuition, your heartfelt desires, your integrity, and the inspiration to create a life you love. Sarah McLean. All right, so today, as I said, we'll be talking about our third eye chakra, which, if you didn't already know and haven't been able to guess by now, is associated with our intuition. The third eye chakra is located exactly where you would imagine it to be, right in the middle of your forehead, in between your two and a little above your two physical eyes. It's connected to that sight that you have without actually seeing. It is knowledge you obtain outside the normal channels of your five senses, as we've already talked about. It's what you know without having any physical evidence whatsoever. If you can't see, hear, taste, touch, or smell it, but you still know it exists, that's knowledge you've gained through your intuition. The third eye chakra is associated with the color indigo, which is deep blue. One of the characteristics of the third eye chakra is the transcendence of duality, which makes so much sense in the light of that quote we just dissected. Our intuition isn't in opposition to our mind or to logic. It integrates all of that into itself and then transcends the level or realm of duality altogether and just kind of says, hey, follow me. You don't have to make a choice between this or that. We're just up here above all of that now. Just come up above it and see it from a different perspective. The third eye wipes away separation and shows us how everything is interconnected. There's also an actual physical gland in your brain called the pineal gland that's associated with this chakra. Modern science doesn't know a lot about what it actually does. There are a lot of theories out there as to why this is the case, and that may be due to a lot of the foods we eat and the medicines we take, as well as other distractions like the constant watching of television. All these things have served to kind of, over the centuries, clogged up or covered over our pineal gland, and they no longer function in humans as they were originally designed to, but we're not going to get into all that today. The best explanation I've heard concerning that aspect of the third eye is that everything you see when you close your physical eyes is all coming from your third eye. So that would closely link it with your imagination, which I think is a good description. When people talk about seeing something with your mind's eye, that's what they're talking about, your third eye. It's also been described as our spiritual sight. It's connected to the element of ether, which I explained in detail last week, because all three of the upper chakras, your throat, your third eye, and your crown, are all represented by the same element of ether. The statement that the third eye chakra makes is, I see with clarity. All right, so let's jump right in. A lot of the information that I'll share with you now is from a woman I follow on YouTube. You can find her as well. I think I've spoken about her to you before. Her name is Dr. Christina Lopes, Lopes. And this is from a talk of hers called How to Use Intuition. The first thing she addresses is how to tell the difference between your intuition and just thoughts you're having, specifically fears you might be projecting and mistaking for some sort of sign that you shouldn't do something, which is something I've struggled with personally over the years. As I've talked about before, I've had an ongoing battle with fear for most of my life, and at a level that I would consider probably a little more than what other people experience. And so my husband is actually one of the people in my life who has helped me a great deal with this fear. And in many ways, he and I are opposites, okay? And our level of fear would be one of those ways in which we are opposite. Not anymore, because I've dealt with so many of my issues surrounding fear, but in the past, an accurate description would probably have been that I was afraid of too many things, and he was not afraid of enough things. From a certain perspective, his actions and attitudes could be interpreted as living recklessly and even dangerously. But we seem to have balanced each other out over the years. And one of the things that helped me most was whenever I would get what I would call a bad feeling about something, a trip we were going to take, or something our sons wanted to do or participate in that I wasn't comfortable with, like dirt bike riding, etc., or my constant borderline hypochondria. Every time that something like that would come up and I would tell him about it, he would ask me the question, and how many times have your bad feelings turned out to be right? And I would have to answer almost never, which was the truth. Another tactic he would use on me was when I would say, but what if so-and-so happens? He would always counter with, but what if it doesn't? And so over the years, having him there to come up against what I was mistaking for intuition, which were really just negative things I thought were going to happen, which was really just me jumping to the worst conclusion, that has proved extremely helpful in my personal progress with this particular issue. And that's basically what she's saying in her talk here. First, she defines intuition, and she uses the dictionary definition that reads, the ability to understand something instinctively without the need for conscious reasoning. Then she adds to that, it's basically an inner knowing that goes beyond conscious reasoning. She also says that the medical and scientific communities consider intuition as a mental phenomenon, but that spiritual teachers like her consider it a heart phenomenon. So there's a slight difference in where these two communities believe the origin of intuition is. And this is why it's important. It speaks to our free will. There's a lot of talk and discussion, especially in the spiritual community, surrounding to what degree we as humans are able to create our own reality and to what degree the actions of others and the collective consciousness impose themselves into or onto our lives. And I think the way she describes, and I like the way she describes it here, she says the heart and the heart chakra are the central processing center of the body. Okay, so that's why it's in the middle of the chakras. It is the bridge, the three lower and the three higher. The bridge in the middle is the heart. A lot of scientists and psychiatrists and psychologists would say that the mind or the brain is the central processing center. But quantum physics is steadily proving more and more that that is not the case. It's actually your heart, especially when we're talking about energy and frequency. The heart is the first organ or area of the body to receive the information. Experiments have shown that little things called sensory neurites, which your heart has about 40,000 of, receive information from the quantum field up to a full second before it enters even the subconscious layer of your mind. The heart is the first to capture all kinds of information and then processes it, bundles it into a neat little packet, zips it up, and sends it to the brain. When your brain then unzips it, the mental process begins. This is where you have the opportunity to either follow your heart's initial reaction or what some would call your gut instinct, or you can override that and make a different choice. You don't have to follow your intuition. A lot of people don't. But whether you follow it or not, the next time information comes in, it's still going to do its job of letting you know what your heart thinks about it, and then it's up to you to choose. Now, there's an argument to be made in support of the theory that those people who are constantly overriding their intuition and choosing against what it's telling them are the people who suffer from these chronic illnesses that don't really have any biological basis. That's interesting. I'm not sure whether or not I believe that, but it's something to consider. It's what she's putting forth. And that makes a lot of sense to me. If your intuition is representative of your true, authentic, higher self, and it keeps sending you messages about what's in the best interest of your highest good, and you consistently ignore those messages, what you're doing is setting up an environment of inner conflict, whether you are consciously aware of it or not. Under the surface, there's always this turmoil going on because you're making choices contrary to what your higher self is telling you, which will eventually manifest in physical disease. There's no way for it not to. All right, so also, remember how I was talking at the beginning today about your intuition's ability to grow and mature? Well, this is a surefire way, what she's talking about, to stunt that growth and keep it in an immature state. It's just common sense that if you keep cutting something off, shutting it down, it's never going to grow properly or get stronger. So I'm going to be very vulnerable right now and give you a personal example from my own life about how this works. When I was in my early 20s, I became engaged to be married to a young man I'd been dating for a few years, and he was a great guy. On paper, we looked like a pretty good match. He checked off most of the boxes I had for a mate in life. So when he asked me to marry him, I accepted. During the course of our engagement, one night we'd been out. He played softball, and we had been to one of his softball games. And then we stopped at the grocery store on the way home to get some groceries. We were going to go to my house and make dinner. And as we were cooking, I looked down at my hand and noticed my engagement ring was gone. And of course, I panicked, and we went on a thorough search for it. We retraced our steps back to the grocery store, talked to the manager, went down all the aisles, went back to the softball field with a flashlight, searched all over the house, the car, and nothing. So there was no ring. It was gone. So he finally just went on home, and we decided to figure it out the next day. But something about it just wasn't sitting right in my gut. I distinctly remember having the thought, what if this is a sign that I am not supposed to marry him? And I can't remember whether it was that night or the next morning, but there was a newspaper laying on a table somewhere in the house that caught my eye. And when I read the headline, it was about some tragedy. I don't even remember exactly what it was, but I do remember reading the words and looking at the picture and getting that same odd feeling in my gut that this whole ring thing was a sign, and that if I didn't pay attention, I could possibly experience some kind of tragedy. I remember connecting those two events in my mind, that newspaper headline and the loss of my engagement ring. So just like she's saying here, my heart took in some information, processed it, sent it up to my brain, and when my brain unzipped the packet, I had the choice to follow what my instinct was telling me or to dismiss it and override it with my free will. So the next day, my fiance came back over, and he and his mom had already turned a claim into their insurance, and plans to replace the ring were already underway. So I chose to ignore the little nudges that I had the night before and override the feelings, and we went ahead with our plans. Within a few weeks, I had another ring, and within a few more months, we were married. Long story short, 5 years later, that marriage ended. Now, do I regret it? No, because that marriage produced my oldest son, who I can't imagine my life without. I also believe I learned a lot of lessons from that experience. I wouldn't be who I am today without that experience, but I'm just using that as an example of how something deep, deep inside me already knew in advance how it was most likely going to end. Looking back after the fact, I truly believe that. But I exercised my free will, and I said no thank you to the opportunity my inner knowing was giving me, and I decided to take the risk anyway. I decided to have the experience, and knowing what I know now and believing what I believe now, I'm choosing not to label that experience as either good or bad. It was an experience I had as a result of a choice I made that is now part of my collective experience, the one that I call my life. And I have integrated that into my intuition. If I were going to judge it, I'd have to say there were both good aspects and bad aspects of the experience. Obviously, there were bad times. If there had not been, we would still be together. But he was not a bad person. We just weren't suited for each other for the long haul. And something in my gut, something in my intuition knew that ahead of time and gave me a chance to choose a different path and to experience something different in my life, which I could have done. We all have dozens of opportunities every day to make decisions that have the potential to change the trajectory of our lives. And it's our choice how closely we want to follow those little feelings we get concerning these decisions. But whatever decision you make, you can always choose to see the good and even to turn a negative experience into something that's beneficial to you, which I think I've done with that particular experience in my life. Again, I'm just using it as an example of how intuition works alongside free will. So next, she talks about the fact that intuition is emotionally neutral. Often we believe that our emotions are a good indicator of whether we should do something or not, but emotions can be fickle and untrustworthy at times. Not always, but sometimes. And again, the degree to which you rely on your emotions is determined by how much control you have over them and how in touch with your heart and your authentic self you are. The more out of control your emotions are, the less they can be dependent on. Emotions, as we've talked about before, are signals. They help you figure things out by pointing you in a direction or by letting you know what needs to be paid attention to. But you can get into trouble if you use them as the basis for all your decisions. I'll give you another personal example. I think I've shared this experience with you before. I can't tell you how many times when my boys were still at home but were old enough to be out by themselves at night that I'd start to worry or have a bad feeling that something had happened to them, especially if they were not at home by the time they were supposed to be home. But every single time, without exception, that I had one of those feelings that I thought might be, or sometimes I thought definitely was my intuition, not one of them ever turned out to be right. They were always okay. The few accidents they have had, I can honestly say that when I was told they'd been in an accident, it was total news to me. In other words, I didn't have any feeling or prior warning about it except one time. And this was a few years ago. One morning I had woken up really early and I couldn't go back to sleep, which is odd for me because I'm a really light sleeper, so I'll wake up a lot during the night, but usually I'm able to go right back to sleep. But this early morning I was not able to, so I said, okay, well, let me make some good use of the time. Let me meditate. So I turned on some music, and as I was listening to it and just kind of in a meditative place, my older son, John Paul's face just popped into my mind. And I had the strangest impulse out of the blue and for no particular reason to start moving my hand up and down around in circles like this. And as I was doing it, I was visualizing these ribbons of white smoke coming out of my fingertips, and it was like his whole body was in the middle of these circles I was making, and I was just going around and around him with this white smoke. And I did it for a few minutes, and then I stopped. And I didn't have a bad feeling. There was no fear. But just as I was stopping, the phone rang, and it was my husband telling me that JP had been in a car accident and I needed to get up and come meet him where they were. And even after I heard the news, there was no panic. I, of course, went as quickly as I could, but there was no sense of fear. And when I got there, he was fine. He was hurt, but not badly. He had broken a rib, we later found out, and banged his knee pretty hard against the dashboard. But for the severity of the wreck, his injuries were minor. His truck and the car that hit him were both totaled, and the driver of the other car had to be taken to the hospital in an ambulance. But so it could have been much, much worse. And I just give you that as another example of the nature of intuition, as she said, being emotionally neutral. That's the only time I feel like I actually did have intuition about one of my sons being in an accident, but there was no fear associated with it. There was just the knowledge, and I did what I did, and then I went and dealt with it. So I think that whole experience was my intuition preparing me for something, but in a very calm way with no fear attached to it. Another thing she talks about is that true intuition, as opposed to your thoughts, is nonverbal. In the experience I just talked about, there were no words associated with the feeling I was having. No voice said to me, your son is in danger, do this or do that. It was just a feeling. It was just an impulse that I needed to make this motion and send him energy. There was no verbal guidance. So you know how we talk about our inner voice or our inner dialogue, which is also known as self-talk? It's that constant voice in our heads. Well, that's talking. It's verbal. That speaks to us in words. So in this talk, she says, if you're hearing information that sounds like that sounds like your inner voice that you hear all the time, self-talk, it's most likely not your intuition, because intuition originates in the heart, and the heart doesn't use verbal language. Only the mind and the ego use verbal language. She says, intuition will always be more just that feeling that you might not be able to put your finger on. You know, when you feel something's off, but you can't explain it, it's always more like that than something that can be expressed with words. If your mind starts churning out a plan, it's more likely that it's not your intuition. If you're having a feeling you can't put into words that won't go away, it probably is your intuition. So speaking of churning out a plan, the next thing she talks about is that because intuition is a quantum phenomenon, it functions one step at a time. She says, when you receive a genuine intuition, it will never come in the form of a 10-step plan or a fully completed roadmap that shows you the exact destination and every step along the way in advance. Intuition is quantum in nature, meaning it will only give you one piece of information at a time. And then she gives two scenarios that show the difference between how the mind works and how intuition works. The first scenario is if you're driving a car and your passenger gets in and has a GPS device with them and they input the address where you're going and you follow the GPS step by step, but at any point you can look at the route and see exactly where and when the turns are going to be ahead of time because that's how GPS works. That's a good depiction, she says, of how to live totally by your mind. Your mental GPS is always in control. Scenario number 2 is when you're driving a car and your passenger gets in without a GPS device and doesn't even tell you where you're going. They just say, I know where the destination is. I just need you to trust me. I'll tell you when and where to turn as we go. And the passenger proceeds to guide you turn by turn, but only one turn at a time. This is what it feels like to live life according to your intuition. In the first scenario, the passenger is your mind. In the second scenario, the passenger is your higher self. And you can only drive through your life in this way if you have total trust in your higher self, or what we would call your Christ consciousness. When you live life in this manner, there is still a master plan and a destination and a roadmap. It's just that it is not known in detail by your mind. It eventually can be known by your mind as you move along, but initially, the master plan is only revealed one step at a time. So when I heard her say this, it made me think of yet another personal experience of mine that's a good example. And now I want to talk about the fact that when it comes to this subject of your intuition, there's not really a right or wrong. Like I said before, it's all about the choice you want to make. And you have to know yourself and what works best for you. The experience I thought about here was the first time I ever spoke in church on a Sunday morning. It was several years ago on Mother's Day, and my brother didn't inform me that I would be the one giving the sermon that day until Thursday of that week. And when he told me, he said, the reason I didn't tell you earlier is because I knew you'd just be nervous the whole time. So I'm only giving you 3 days to be nervous. But I already have a message in mind for you to give, and it's one you've already given on Tuesday morning, and here it is. And then he told me what it was. And of course, if I had wanted to, I could have come up with something completely new, but he had already provided for me what he wanted me to talk about. So that again, that it was up to me. There's always a balance between your following your intuition, between your free will and go and choosing to follow your nudges. But in this scenario, he is representative of my higher self. He knew me well enough to know I'm not the kind of person who needs a whole lot of time to be sitting around thinking about something that scares me. I don't perform well under those conditions. It was so much better for him to do it like he did it, so I would not live in dread for 2 weeks or a month or however long it was going to be until it happened. The other element that was present here is that I trust him. Just like the driving scenario, if you don't trust the person in the passenger seat, you're not going to agree to just let them say, turn here, now turn here, and not tell you in advance where you're going and exactly how you're going to get there. But the more you do trust that person, the easier it is. So the fact that I really trust my brother is the reason why it worked. And I wasn't mad at him about the way he handled it. In fact, I was grateful because, but in order for that to have worked out the way it did, I had to trust him. The more you are connected to and the more you trust your higher self, the more you trust your soul to guide you, the more you can live a life guided by intuition. But all of us aren't in the same place on our journey, okay? And some of us just don't have that sort of personality. Some people are just more comfortable living in their mind and knowing every turn in advance. And sometimes that's because they don't trust their higher self. And sometimes that's because that's just who they've decided to be and how they've decided they want to live their lives. And that's okay too. Again, there's no right or wrong really, just choices and the outcomes of those choices. I like to think of it the same way as how food affects different people. Some people have a horrible time with dairy. And other people love it. Some people can't digest it at all, and some people are just fine. Same with sugar. Same with meat. Some people have no issue limiting their sugar intake, and others have systems that are overly sensitive to it. So I could go on and on with that, but I'm sure you get the point. Some things that work really well for you don't work really well for other people. And then there's the simple issue of preference. I don't like onions. There's not a good reason for it. I just hate the way they taste. I don't like the way they smell. I don't like the way they look, so I don't eat them. Would it kill me if I did? Probably not. But I don't like them, so I choose not to eat them. Point is, you can choose to live your life solely by your mental processes and logic and reason if you want to, or you can choose to live completely by your intuition, or you can choose some combination of the two. Like I said, you have to find out what works best for you. Learning that process of learning what's best for you is one of the main things we're here on earth to do. So earlier in this series, I talked about fear. And I mentioned that one thing I've learned about myself is that fear to me is like alcohol to an alcoholic. I can't play with it because I don't know how to stop. It's hard for me to set boundaries with it, and it's far too easy for my fear to spiral out of control. So I choose to leave it alone entirely as much as I possibly can. It's the same concept with what we're talking about today. You're not wrong for always going with your gut. And you're not wrong for always wanting to know the plan ahead of time and living mostly in your head. It's just a matter of figuring out what works best for you. And as I've been saying for a while now, not judging your neighbor or your spouse or your child or your friend if what works best for them is not the same as what works best for you. All I want you to know today is that intuition is not something that is reserved only for special people who have a gift. Everyone has access to their own intuition that goes beyond just a mental process. There are certain things, and there are certain things you can do to strengthen it if you're interested in doing that, but you don't have to. You can leave it totally alone if that's what you want to do. It's your choice. But know that it's always available to you, and it's always there to be used as a tool if you want to. Ultimately, you get to decide what you're going to trust in and to what degree. If you do want to begin to follow your intuition more and are interested in strengthening it, then there are a couple of tips I want to leave with you. 1, quiet the mind. Let's go back to our last quote today. Meditation is an essential travel partner on your journey of personal transformation. Meditation connects you with your soul, and this connection gives you access to your intuition, your heartfelt desires, your integrity, and the inspiration to create a life you love. So we established earlier that intuition doesn't come from your mind. It is not a mental process. It's a heart and gut knowledge. So in order for you to strengthen it, you have to quiet the mind first. You have to get it out of the way and give your heart the floor, as it were. Or as my brother said on Sunday, sometimes you just got to take your mind and put it out of the room if you want to strengthen your intuition. Secondly, just like when you're dealing with money, and I'm talking about physical money here. Do you know how banks train their tellers to quickly spot counterfeit bills? They don't make them study or spend a lot of time with counterfeits because counterfeits come in so many different forms. what they do is they make them handle real money so much that they know exactly what it feels like. Then when they get something in their hands that doesn't feel like that, they immediately know this is fake because they've become so familiar with how the real feels. I love that concept. It's the same with our intuition. I've heard it suggested that if this is really something you want to work on, you can start keeping a journal. Just like you can have a dream journal or a gratitude journal, make an intuition journal and begin by thinking back to all the times you can remember when you had a feeling that something was about to happen or a certain situation was going to turn out a certain way. Were you right or were you wrong? Write it down. And then write down as much information as you can remember about what state of mind you were in and what your thought was when the intuition came to you. Like we've talked about, was it verbal or was it just a feeling? Were you in a panic or were you calm? Did it just pop into your head out of the blue, or did this thought come to you when you were actively trying to figure something out? Was there a strong emotion attached to it, or was the thought just neutral information? So after you do this for a while, you'll start noticing patterns. You'll begin to see what state you're in when you're receiving real, genuine, intuitive messages. And the more you can tap into that feeling, the quicker you'll be able to tell the real from the fake. Or said a little bit differently, you'll be able to tell when it's your mind talking to you or your heart. And then it's totally up to you which one you want to follow, but at least you'll be able to make an informed decision based on that knowledge. So that's the information that I have for you today about the third eye chakra. I hope it's been helpful and has given you some food for thought. Remember that it's always a matter of your free will, whether to follow your head or your heart, or to do the work of integration. That's where your heart includes your head. As we learned, we can do that. That's possible too. No one can make that choice but you. All I can tell you is that for me and my house, and I mean me and my house, not my family members, I can't choose for anyone else, but I'm always going to follow my heart and its wisdom and intuition all of the time. I want to leave you with an affirmation for the week to strengthen your third eye chakra, and it is this: I create my own reality. I trust my intuition. I connect with the wisdom of the universe. It is safe for me to see the truth. My mind and my heart are in perfect balance. Amen. And so it is. Thank you so much for joining me today. We will see you again tomorrow night at 6:30 with our ongoing study series of Eckhart Tolle's A New Earth. And we will also see you either virtually or in person on this coming Sunday. I love you. Be at peace. Have a great week.